Hello, everybody. This is Aaron Lelito with another episode of the Wild Roof podcast. Today we have another LitMag editor. We've been doing a few of these along the way, so somebody new and another publication to check out for us today. Joining me, I have Colleen Sabaka, and she edits OptWest. So we'll get into a little bit of her creative background, learn more about OptWest, cover a couple odds and ends along the way, and then we'll cover some of the details for checking out the publication as well. Colleen, welcome. And if you would, give us a little bit of your brief introduction. What was your entry point even as somebody creating a lit mag, in this case, OptWest?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Aaron. The entry point. So I'm originally from Minnesota, and I moved to Los Angeles about 10 years ago. Um, and always was really interested in writing. I loved Shakespeare sonnets and structured verse. Got really into that. Was never any good at it. But that was kind of my entry world into this like poetry world, literary space. I always looked for poetry communities, and that's always what I have tried to seek is to be around creative people, to be around writers. I remember one of my first poetry communities I was part of was on LiveJournal. I think this was in maybe 2007. And I was trying to join this community, and every member has to vote yes or no on your poems. It's very cutthroat. So I submitted my poems, and I got a lot of no's from the members. And one person said, no, but I think you might like Towlin, which I had never heard that name before. And so I, Googled Towlin and got really interested in him as a writer, as a creator, as a publisher, as well as kind of that whole alt lit scene, I guess. And always wanted to sort of be part of something like that. And so I guess went to undergrad for poetry, always tried to be friends with writers, always tried to be, if not directly within that community, at least somewhat attached to it or on the outskirts in some way. Eventually, moved out to Los Angeles and felt really frustrated, I think, that I wasn't really involved in any sort of writing community out here. I didn't really know where to go. I didn't really know what to do. Again, I was just a bystander, right? Just someone who was following others, doing something that I wanted to do. Wasn't really writing for many years, and then ended up going to law school. And law school kind of changed a lot of things for me. It got me back into writing. It got me back into creative writing. And then it also gave me sort of this confidence and knowledge that, oh, I can just sort of do what I want to do, right? I was like, okay, I wanted to be a lawyer, and I just followed all the steps. And then one day I was a lawyer, and I thought, if I can do that, then certainly I can create a literary community, be part of a literary community. I can write, I can edit, I can do all the things that I want to do. Like there's really nothing holding me back here, right? And I became sort of obsessed with this idea of the way places make us feel. in regards to my relationship with Minnesota. And I would go through these phases where I was so homesick and I wanted to just like go back, go home. And then I would also sort of the pendulum would swing the other way and I would be like, I'm never leaving. I love California. This is where it's all happening. And really just going back and forth on my feelings for Minnesota when I was in LA, and then also my feelings for LA when I was home in Minnesota. And so I thought, how can I make this tangible? How can I get deeper into what this is, why I feel so different, why I feel so affected? And sort of that was the idea for Opt West. And I realized that instead of trying to be part of somebody else's world or part of somebody's creation, that I should just try and create my own world and my own community. And I've just been, kind of winging it ever since. And yeah, so here we are. I've done 3 issues so far, and I'm working on the fourth. It's been about 3 years, and still figuring out what it all means. I guess that's what it's all about, right?
Yeah, that's one of the fun common threads when I talk with other editors and other lit mag people. At least that's what I like to hear. And maybe it's a self-select group because like it is a common theme of like, well, let me create the thing that I'm looking for and we'll figure it out as we go. Um, and so, yeah, that's always like a fascinating aspect to me in the creation part and also like the DIY ethos of it. And that was something that was really appealing to me. And that's something I love to see in other publications. There's a lot to ask about so far. So we'll stick to the place theme for a second. What was it like in Minnesota in terms of the creative landscape? You mentioned you kind of had a little bit of a shifting perspective on it as far as leaving and then coming back, and then so maybe yeah, what was it like? And then like, what's your perspective on it now?
Yeah, so I think growing up in Minnesota, I mean, I always wanted to leave. And I'm from a very small town in northern Minnesota. And I think growing up, you take where you're from and your home for granted because I was always thinking about, I want to live in a big city, right? I want to be, in more exciting place. I want to be able to go to the store and not run into my teacher and, all of my neighbors and see everybody that I know. I want to be anonymous. I want to be able to be whoever I want to be and not be associated with who my family is or, who I was as a kid, right? Um, Kind of trying to escape, I think, was my dream. And so it always felt very closed, very claustrophobic, very boring. And so now look, when I think about Minnesota, it's different, right? That's where a lot of my friends live still. My family lives there. Um, it's so interesting of a place. The people looking back now, everyone is so eccentric. Everyone is so interesting. Everybody has things that are very similar qualities. I look back and I think of Minnesota as very cozy. I think of it as very safe. And it's just this very, very sweet place that I know is always there. But I think there's also just the opportunities that being in a city sort of provides and energy that being in a city sort of provides. And I think that it's been beneficial for me as a creative person to be in a city and looking back. But yeah, I guess those are just some of the differences between how I felt
Yeah,
about it growing up and how I feel about it now.
yeah, and that is. it's interesting, yeah, because like you said, the desire to escape kind of has like a negative connotation in the claustrophobia and like wanting to be separate. Makes sense. I'm sure if you didn't leave, you would not maybe not have the same perspective you do now, where you can kind of have that like a little bit of a distance to appreciate things a little bit more. And then like why LA? You said that you wanted to move to a bigger city. That's is about as big as they get in terms of, I guess, land area coverage, and people, I suppose. So yeah, what brought you to California and LA specifically?
That's interesting. Why I came to LA. That's a long story. I moved here with somebody and I wanted to, yes, move to a bigger city, move somewhere with a different energy. You know, obviously the weather doesn't hurt living out here. Um, but there were also times in LA where, again, with that homesick feeling, where I sort of felt like I was here against my will, or I was here because I was living somebody else's dream, and that it wasn't necessarily my choice to be here. And that's sort of where Opt West came from, because to opt is to choose, right? And then, you know, this idea of West can mean whatever you want it to. For me, it is specifically, you know, geographically West, but the idea of West can mean so many things as far as just being an other place. And so Opt West was really me convincing myself that I wanted to live in LA, that I wanted to live in California, that this is where I was supposed to be, that this was my choice. And it was kind of created in a way to convince myself that I wanted to be here.
That's really cool. Yeah. I did not know where the name came from, so that clarifies that. That's an interesting story then, yeah.
Yeah, and I
Um,
mean it has come full circle in so many ways where now I am living here because I want to and I love it here and I'm kind of yeah, again on the other side of that pendulum swing. And it's all been this self-fulfilling prophecy in a way. So if nothing else, I will say that it was successful for that reason.
yeah, and I think, with any maybe life decision or something, you could obviously view it from multiple viewpoints and say, well, like I have to do this or it's being imposed upon me. And that's, doesn't feel healthy a lot of times if you're saying I'm just, somebody's making me do something, as opposed to, like you said, it's my choice to do it. And it might be the same thing, but if you're approaching it with the idea that you're choosing it and you're getting to do it because of, whatever the circumstances are, yeah, it's a different story. So yeah, it's interesting, right? How art can play, a role in our own narratives like that, even in the creation of a publication like that.
I think that even like in submissions and when I'm reading emails and I'm emailing with people, so many people are I'm living here because I have to, right? Because maybe I'm taking care of somebody, or I'm living here because it's where I'm going to school, or I'm living here because of my spouse. There's so many times where everyone is writing about the place that they're in, even though it's not the place that they want to be. And I think that that's an extremely interesting subject matter of how you describe a place that you don't want to be in. You know, what do you see about it? That is certainly something that I'm very, very interested in as well.
Cool. Yeah. So we were touched on it a little bit in terms of like the themes, the aesthetics of Opt West. So was there anything you could maybe add besides what you just said?
I think that the themes have continued to just reveal themselves with every single issue. And I almost don't even know what the meaning or the tone of an issue is until months after it's finished. And then I look back and I'm like, oh, yeah, I was really going through something, or yeah, this is what I was thinking about. I think. it's hard to really pinpoint, much of a specific theme other than places and how they affect us and inform our work. But something I like to do is to always have through lines between the content of OptWest and other things in my life. So if I read, a really good book or I get really interested in a particular like philosophy or a literary theory concept, applying that to OptWest, as well as finding pieces that complement the other sort of my other interests that I'm reading about. And then that way it just all sort of ends up making sense. I always think I want to be able to open any page of OptWest and be able to talk about it at length and be able to articulate what I like about the piece, how it connects to my life, how it connects to the page across from it, how it connects to any other page, something that I know about the person who wrote it. All of that context and having really a heavy dose of context behind everything, I think makes it really potent. And that's kind of the end goal.
I love that. And it's like it's a hands-on process from your side of things. I think that's one of the reasons I like talking with editors like this because it reveals some of that behind the scenes where a submitter wouldn't necessarily think of it that way in the sense of the person on the other side or people on the other side sharing the creation process. It's not just the writer submits, gets accepted, gets put in the book or on the screen. Yeah, there's a little bit of like an interplay of how it comes together, why it comes together, what its role is in a larger collection or something like that. So that all resonates for me for sure.
Yeah, yeah, it's a really emotional process because at the end of the day, the person who's creating it is it's serving as a record, a record of that time in your life. And so, yeah, it's very personal. I mean, I have anything that's going on OptWest, I have printed out and I'm carrying it around with me everywhere and I'm looking at it and I'm thinking about it and everything else that I'm doing outside of OptWest, I'm thinking, how does this tie in? And again, finding those connections, finding those through lines so that it all makes sense. And then, I guess that's how we find meaning, right, in what we're doing. So yeah, it's very, very personal to me.
And then we could maybe stay on that topic for a second, just in terms of like the presentation, more of a zine presentation. What's appealing about that format and maybe more of that, I guess, DIY kind of ethos in the sense of like the small press world. Like what is it about that aesthetic that's captivating?
Hmm. I've always I love, high low. And I've always been interested in sort of a lo-fi aesthetic for the most part. I'll be listening to music and it's like some guy recording a song on a boombox 20 years ago and it's all fuzzy. That sounds great to me. Or a photograph, a film photograph that has some sort of light leaks or, a big slice through it because something happened when it was getting developed. Like that is just so cool to me. And so I never wanted OptiWest to be perfect and polished because that's just not true to who I am. But I do always want it to be very high quality. I want the images to look vivid on the pages. I want the paper to feel good. I want it to look really good wherever it's sitting. I want it to have weight to it. So that's kind of like the high low. I want the object itself to be of high quality. And obviously the content is very, very high quality. But sort of the construction of it is, just me in InDesign, me on YouTube figuring out how to resize things. And, that's really all it comes down to. And so I do like the aesthetic of a zine in the way that it's so low stakes. But if it means something to you and you connect to it, then it becomes sacred, in a way, or it becomes really significant. So I do love having that physical object, to send out and share. And I'm also just honestly not very good at digital things. So I don't even know how I would make it a digital, publication. So figuring it out as I go.
I know, yeah. I think a lot of these things kind of come down to like, well, I don't know how to do the other thing. So that's how I make it. In the creative process, it could be for yeah, in music, in visual art and writing. Sometimes working with limitations, and then that's part of the generative process. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, and always had I guess an affection or an affinity or something like that with kind of like zine culture. I mean, I guess came of age in the '90s, but even after after the fact, like kind of looking back at the '80s and '90s, even like music era, looking at like the zine culture, that was always appealing to me. I feel, it was never not appealing to me in that kind of aesthetic, like you were mentioning, a little more on the lo-fi or offbeat and dissonant kind of aesthetic. So yeah, in a weird way, there is this parallel with maybe a more literary art form to have an inflection of something that's a little, in some contexts, rough around the edges or something like that. That doesn't bother me in that sense, in terms of like not having it be super polished. Cool. Yeah, that's all good stuff. What kind of, as a writer, maybe back to kind of the more the personal side, like you as a writer, like what are you interested in your own writing? You mentioned kind of getting back to creative writing as you're going, into law school or in the process. So like what's interesting to you as a writer from that side of things?
Yeah, writer is such an interesting word. I think when, if you're not really serious about writing or you're not a serious writer, it can feel a little pretentious. You know what I mean? It kind of feels like something that doesn't really fit. It gets a little bit, I feel a little self-conscious, to refer to myself as a writer. Um, but I do, write, and I like it makes me more comfortable to think about it more as like a translation, right? And when I was in law school and I was learning how to do legal writing, it really sort of I connected it with poetry. I found all these similarities with poetry, where you're taking all of this really complicated information, right? And then you're describing it as clearly and as simply as possible. And that's sort of the translation part of it is how can, in my job, I'm taking these laws and all of this legalese language, and then based on off of who my audience is, I'm able to just very simply tell them what that means. That to me is really exciting. And so applying that to poetry has sort of reinvigorated, the way that I approach it and my ability to at least attempt to write. As far as what I like to write about, I think I'm a very, emotional person. I'm a very domestic person. And so I like to talk about domestic things, relationships, things very close to home, very personal things, and sort of apply more, look at them in a more factual way, either through comparing them to something else or I don't know, like an example is like a very easy example is in LA, we have a lot of earthquakes, right? And the ground is constantly moving below us at any time. And sort of thinking about that applying to other things and how there's this constant sense of like shifting, maybe in a relationship, that you're not really able to explain. And so relating it to some sort of phenomenon or sort of scientific like occurrence helps me detach from the emotion, and gives me the ability to actually figure out what I'm trying to get at. So I don't know. I love like Raymond Carver. I think he does that really, really well. And then also the goal is always to try and convey the message through the language itself. And that's a very, literary theory concept that I get really obsessed with, but attempting to do that is very fun for me as well.
Cool. Yeah, yeah, big Raymond Carver fan as well.
Yeah, shout
Yeah.
out.
Do you have a favorite? This is an off the top of your head question. Do you have like a favorite story or poem or whatever from Raymond Carver
Yeah, I love
or
his
collection?
poem. I love Well, I actually I maybe 2 summers ago I read his complete works or his complete poems, which was incredibly interesting to read about how he approaches life and how he views death because he was writing about his own death. A lot of his poems are. But my favorite poem is called Morning, Thinking of Empire. And it's about this couple um, eating breakfast and just the magnitudes that, as you can imagine, that comes with, yeah, the multitudes of, yeah, emotion that even just sitting down with someone eating breakfast. Um, yeah, that's my favorite poem.
Cool. Yeah, I don't recall that one off from memory, so I'll have to look that one up. I'm not as well versed in his poems, but I've definitely liked what I've read and really got into his short stories for a while. I read, or I've taught back when I was teaching. There's a very short story, which is part of the reason why I taught it a lot, called Chef. It was Chef's House. That's what it was called. And so it's such a clear example, and it was, presented in a, whatever survey class or introduction to literature or whatever the case is. But it was just such a clear example of like doing these very kind of like seemingly effortless things as you're reading it, but like take the step back, like how did in like 2 sentences he just kind of like gave you this little like explain the whole like relationship dynamic right there in this little like you'd read it 50 times and like not pay attention to it, then you stop and say, oh yeah, look at how that image relates to that image relates to that, and then 2 sentences later it's like you got it, or like the ambiguity of it is stories at times, yeah. So
Yeah, I mean, he's so amazing. Um, Let me pull this one up. Uh, Actually, I can't find it. Sorry. I'll send it to you later.
no
Yeah.
worries, yeah. We always get to a reading recommendation or two at some point, so I think that qualifies. We could talk a little bit about kind of the editorial process as a reviewer of the submissions. So that was kind of like the our connection point. I guess we could kind of like talk a little bit about that, and then you can explain how you approach reviewing submissions. So I had submitted work to OptWest. I didn't know it was recommended to me a while back, um, but I had never submitted anything. So sent in some poems, maybe last fall or something like that. I don't know how long ago it was at this point, a few months back. You messaged me and said you'd like to include two of them. And I just found it was like one of the most interesting like responses I've gotten, not just to be accepted, which is always great, but you kind of added a little bit of commentary or context, like you had said previously, and said, like I looked at these again after a while, and like I really found something interesting after kind of seeing them and then putting them aside or however it played out, and then looking at them again later. So I thought that was kind of a fascinating tidbit, just to say, like, how any reader, you don't have to be an editor of a lit mag to say, read something once, read it a year later, it's going to be a different experience. But just kind of curious about like how that plays into, your role as a reader and reviewer. Do you typically put things aside and let them breathe and let the space kind of like settle around them, or how does that play out usually?
Yeah, it can be a long process for me. I think when I go through submissions, right away there will be a few things that I'm like, absolutely, this is what I want, this is what I'm looking for. Same thing the other way. There's going to be things where I'm just like, this is just not for Opt West. It's great, but it just doesn't go with like what I'm doing. And so once I sort of determine those, then there's going to be, many, many dozens of pieces that I have no idea. And every time I read them, I have a different opinion about it. And so it slowly sort of starts to come together again, not just because of all of the other pieces that are going into the issue, but because all of the external things going on in my life and what I'm reading and what I'm talking about and what I'm interested in. And you sort of need that living life piece to, or at least I need that living life piece to be able to come back and say, okay, what's all going to tell this story that I don't know what the story even is. I won't until a long time from now, but what's fitting that. And so yeah, I think your pieces are a really good example of that. I read your submission and I was like, okay, there's, some things I really like here. I'm not really sure if it's going to go with everything else. But it was very much a maybe. And then a couple months later, like I opened your submission and two of your poems, I was like, whoa, this is some of the lines just completely connected to what I was trying to get at. But I did not know that the first time I read your poems, the second time I read your poems. It was probably the third or the fourth time that I even read them that I realized that you were articulating some of the ideas that I was looking to explore. And so I think it's really interesting how time and life can influence the end result. I used to, when I first started this, I was so anxious for it to just be a real thing, right? The first issue, I was like, I need to show that
Mhm.
this is real. And so I wasn't rushing through submissions, but I had less of a clear vision of what I wanted in the end than I do now. And so I think even though I felt really stressed out about the submission process taking so much time, I realized that it could be a good thing. And the longer it takes, the better the end result is going to be. And when I say better, meaning I'm going to be happy with it,
Mhm.
um, or it's going to sort of, again, be a record of something I'm trying to make a record of.
Yeah, I know there is that kind of balance of like finding what you connect with the piece and knowing it, or if on the other side it doesn't connect and knowing that. But there is a lot of in between I find as well, and a lot of times it does depend on either like I have other readers to rely on sometimes as well, so they can see things that I'm not seeing and all that. But yeah, maybe it takes a timing a timing thing of like something that you can just strike you and there's a familiarity there, or there's just something that's a spark that comes out. That is part of part of the writer's job is to do things like that, but there's a not aware part of part of the process of like who it goes to and what's going on with them when it gets to them. So that is like always, it is a fascinating communication. It's not always efficient in terms of writing, creative work and then spreading them out. And like sometimes they get to people and and sometimes the timing lines up where they connect with it. So yeah, it is like it's a wonderfully like ineffective mechanism, but yeah, when it works, hey, you can't argue with that part. Um, I think there is a place for like kind of yeah leaving a little bit more space around the review process, and at least there are writers out there who would appreciate the extra time, even if it means like getting a response later than sooner. I think that's worthwhile.
Yeah, and I think it's also just finding things that I want to live with and I want to be part of my life forever. I mean, it seems like maybe I'm just copy and pasting a poem into InDesign, but as I'm sure you know, it's hours of staring at the words to where the poem loses all meaning, right? Because you're making sure that everything's looks perfect. Um, and then it's also going back, to each issue or every single time I send out an issue, I'm flipping through it and looking at it through the reader's eyes and what are they going to think about this? And so it's when I'm picking something, it's not just because it's good. It's going to be part of my life. It's going to be part of my record. It's going to help me understand something about the world that I didn't before. Um, and so I think to that point, the same way I feel a little bit uncomfortable with the word writer, sometimes I feel a little bit uncomfortable with the word editor, right? It can have that sort of similar pretension. And so with writing, where I like to think of it as a translation, I think with editing, I like to think of it as making a connection. And connecting people, whether contributors are actually connecting and collaborating on things, or whether they're just able to make connections in their own work to the work that is, part of the same issue. Um, and also hopefully connecting to me. I try to get to know as many people as I can through this. Again, with my original goal, my original desire going back to when I was 17 was to be part of a literary community. And so I hope that in addition to being a contributor, that these creators will also be friends.
Thanks for adding that. Yeah, because it does go right back right back to origin point of like wanting to be a part of that
Hmm.
that group or that community, which I clearly share because that's kind of when I started the Wild Roof thing. It was not initially, but I pretty soon realized like, oh yeah, this can be a way to connect with people who are doing creative stuff that I like too. Once you get past the question of like, can this even happen? Is this even possible?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's definitely some common ground there. Do you have any other projects you're working on besides OptWest?
Yeah, so I have a new project. It's called This Revisiting, and it's with my friend Brad Vogler. He just published a book couple years ago. Uh, that his project is called A Viewing Space. And so we both sort of have our own things that we're doing, but we kept always coming back to this discussion of revisiting. And I know, Aaron, you and I have talked about it here, but it's something that Opt West explores that I wanted to explore in other ways and deeper. And that's really the context and meaning and how it changes based off of time passing. So, right when we were talking about Minnesota, the way that I felt about Minnesota when I was there as a kid is so much different than the way I feel as an adult living far away from Minnesota. and sort of applying that not only to places, but also to other things. So, for example, a writer, you write a poem, and then your poem exists in the world. 5 years later, 10 years later, you're so far away, you're so distanced from who you were when you wrote it, going back and saying, well, what does it mean now? Has that meaning changed? And so we are trying to find different ways to explore that subject matter. And we want to um, create some sort of mailing subscription, again, staying in that physical sort of zine, DIY realm, and build something that way, piece by piece, and explore what it means to revisit places, revisit art, revisit memories. And it really comes down to this, at least for me, seeking this like nostalgia and sort of this going back in time. And again, I guess another form of escape, going into the past and seeing who you are now and how that affects and influences what you created in the past. So it's all very conceptual, all very meta, but I love those things. And so we're finding tangible ways to put those ideas out into the world.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting as well. Yeah, you'll have to keep me posted about that, and then see how that develops. That's cool. And Brad Vogler, he's a visual artist or photographer.
He is a poet,
Oh, poet. Okay,
yes,
nice.
but he also, I've seen some of his photography, and I will say he's a photographer as well.
Okay, nice. Yeah. And then as a closing question or offering, I like to ask if you have any writing prompt, writing exercise, something you've used that you've liked or heard and seems appealing. Could be something small, just like what would be like a writing prompt you can offer listeners.
Let me think, a writing exercise.
Something you said earlier, I wrote it down thinking about this question ahead of time. So if you need a little assistance, I could reflect that back to you or bounce that back to you.
Yeah, I
Um,
want to hear that. I do want to hear that. What comes to my mind is something that I do every single day, whether for Opt West or for something else, and that is writing about things. So if I'm recommending something to someone, or if I'm writing an acceptance or a rejection, it's articulating why I like something or why I don't like something. Articulating why. And I think that that has been extremely helpful for me, not just as trying to improve in writing, but also because it's helping influence my taste. It's helping me figure out what I like because I'm actually sitting and thinking about why. Like these days, so much is just about vibes, man, right? It's like, okay, this looks cool, this looks good, but really getting deeper. And then when I'm sharing, I'll text somebody a poem or I'll text somebody a picture, and I want to say, why did it make me think of them? And so I think maybe just getting more into the practice of that, of kind of going into the next level and writing about something instead of just sharing something would be what initially comes to mind as far as what I'm doing as a writing exercise. But I do want to hear what you thought of as well, of course.
oh, sure. Yeah, no, that's a great one too. Yeah, I think that reminds me of like one of those old lessons too, is like even taking something like a song, for example, and having students like write like why you like it. So it was like to get past the loop, like I referred to as like I like it because it's good. Well, why is it good? Because I like it. So, but actually the point is to like be articulate about why. it is like you have a feeling or have a response or have a reaction to. Yeah.
Exactly.
But just the general question was like something like, how do places make us feel? So then you can kind of fill in the blank about a place. So, pick a spot and say like, how does this place make me feel? And it's similar to what you're just suggesting in the sense of like being able to articulate kind of the layers of how a certain visual or a certain sensory input kind of relates to having that kind of whatever that internal subjective response is. Yeah, like peeling back the layers a little bit on that. So like my mind went of like just like kind of locations maybe than like places in the bigger sense, like a city or a state, but even just, your regular routine or like your regular commute or something like that. You can think about a place that you pass regularly. So that was kind of where my mind went.
Yeah, that's great. Everyone should do that and then email it to me.
There you go. Submissions to OptWest. Yeah, so that's before I forget. Yeah, so when are submissions open, or do you know when the submissions will be open next at this point?
Um,
Should we stay tuned?
Stay tuned. I'm still working on the fourth issue. Um, my original goal was to do five, so there's going to be at least one more after this. And then, I mean, I'm not sure what OptWest will be. I think that my hope is that it will always exist, in some sort of form. It might not always be a zine. It might become something else. So yeah, I would just say, you know, I mostly post on Instagram. So if any of this interests you, as weird as it all may sound, follow along on the Instagram, and that's where I post whenever submissions are open or updates. And yeah, so we'll see what the future holds.
Perfect. Yeah, social media, Instagram, you said, and then the website is optwest.com. Is that
Yep,
right?
optwest.com, and then Instagram, I think it's opt_west. But if you type in OptWest, then it'll probably pop up.
And yeah, we'll link to them and make it easy to get there. But yeah, thanks again for joining me. Talk to you again soon.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Aaron.